Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Nazi Titanic, the incredible untold story of a doomed ship in World War II, by Robert P. Watson. Narrated by Tom Perkins. Introduction. History's Secrets. The story of the Cap Arcona found me, not the other way around. The original plan was to write a book on the final week of World War II in Europe, from Adolf Hitler's suicide in his bunker on April 30th, 1945, to victory in Europe, VE, Day, roughly 1 week later. By all accounts, these final days of the war and the Holocaust were marked by a complicated mix of heroism and relief, as well as by tragedy and absolute chaos. This seemed to be a worthy topic for a book. Nevertheless, upon discovering that the British government had sealed some of the war records from that final week of fighting, my interest was piqued. Subsequently, I stumbled upon the shocking details that constitute the end of the story you are about to hear. It was a story I had never heard, and one I could not resist. Needless to say, I never wrote the other book. This is often how the process of historical discovery works. The stories of history often remain hidden for many years, as the process of historical discovery sometimes works in strange and frustratingly slow ways. Indeed, there is more we do not know than we do know about the past. Most of what happened in the past was never recorded, and the vast majority of documents, letters, and books that were produced at a particular time are lost to us today, whether by fire, decomposition, neglect, or intentional destruction. Apropos to the story in this book, it must be remembered that, while many survivors of the Holocaust sat down in subsequent years to record their stories, at least 6 million voices will never be heard. The same can be said for the 60 to 75 million people lost in World War II. Yet, World War II and the Holocaust were, respectively, history's bloodiest war and most costly example of genocide. As a result, many scholars have devoted their careers to telling these stories, as have the concentration camp survivors and other survivors and combat veterans who shared their painful memories with the next generation through published memoirs, candid talks with loved ones over the dinner table, and taped oral history interviews. The countless injustices of those two momentous events are among the most comprehensively studied and documented of any crisis or war in human history. It is thus tempting to think that we know everything there is to know about them, but this is not the case. Even events as thoroughly documented as these still have their secrets. The story of the celebrated but ill-fated ship Cap Arcona has rarely been told. It does not appear in textbooks and has all but been ignored by journalists, scholars, and the news media. Even Hollywood, which has made many stories about World War II and a few memorable films on the Holocaust, has yet to feature the events surrounding this ship on the big screen. Likewise, numerous museums, memorials, and other appropriate commemorations of these events exist around the world. Therefore, one would think such would be the case for the Cap Arcona, that the ship would be commemorated by grand memorials, statues, musical ballads, and theatrical performances. Yet this is not the case. The events surrounding the Cap Arcona's remarkable saga have yet to be staged in a dramatic production, nor have they inspired touching lyrics or a somber musical score. Rather, the most intriguing and infamous ship in history is remembered through only a handful of obscure studies published in Germany several years ago, a couple of short documentaries, memoirs by 2 of the lucky few who lived through the ordeal to tell the tale, and a handful of other forgotten sources. Today, just a single understated marker hidden among the seaside hotels and fishermen's homes of Germany's Baltic coast can be found at the site of the disaster. Only one small museum located nearby in Neustadt and opened in the year 1990 tells the story to the smattering of tourists who, from time to time, walk through its doors. Such are the lonely testaments to an extraordinary ship. Every passing year brings with it fewer eyewitnesses to and survivors of the incident in question. Dwindling numbers of survivors and their family members gather on the anniversary of the tragedy to remember those lost. Even those living today near the site of the event along Germany's northern shoreline know little about the ghastly attack that killed thousands, and are surprised to find that anyone else knows about their community's secret and dark past. Case in point, a few years ago at one of the memorial services held at the site of the disaster, a reporter in attendance was approached by a resident of the nearby town. The local man was surprised that anyone would come to such an inconspicuous gathering, so he asked the reporter, "So your family is German?" When the reporter responded in the negative, the townsman questioned him further. "Oh, then you are Jewish?" The reply was again no. Finally, in a puzzled tone, the local resident wondered, "How could you possibly know about this?" Shipwrecks and maritime disasters have always held a curious and dark place in human memory. They evoke an array of emotions and morbid fascination, perhaps all the while reminding us of our limited power over the sea. For some, they temper our natural drive to explore. For others, they entice our appetite for discovery and adventure. Yet few, if any, ordeals at sea are as tragic and shocking as that of the Cap Arcona. Even though the Cap Arcona has all but been forgotten, the German ocean liner was quite possibly the most intriguing ship ever to set sail. There is another reason the story of the Cap Arcona remains enigmatic. At the conclusion of World War II, the British government sealed many documents pertaining to the ship. They were to be sealed until the year 2045, a full century after the end of the conflict, leading the late Benjamin Jacobs, one of the few people to have survived the ship's final voyage, to dub the incident the 100-Year Secret. What follows is one of the least well-known sagas of the Third Reich's terrifying reign. It is an adventure that starts with the ambitions of a German shipping company. Opening Act: Germany's Titanic. Chapter 1. A Bold Idea. The Germans loved their ships, and for good reason. Throughout the closing years of the 19th century and the opening of the 20th, German shipyards produced some of the finest vessels afloat. They were a source of great national pride. So, too, was Germany's shipping industry, a powerful engine driving the country's economy. However, all that changed with the outbreak of World War I on July 28, 1914. Merchant, luxury, and cargo ships were mothballed, scavenged for parts, or conscripted for wartime use. Others were sunk by enemy fire, irrespective of whether they were sailing under a military or commercial flag. The total defeat of Germany at the end of World War I in 1918 plunged the country's economy into deep depression. Currency was not worth the paper on which it was printed, and severe food shortages plagued communities from Berlin to Bavaria to the Black Forest. The nation also mourned roughly 7 million killed, wounded, missing in action, or taken prisoner. These hardships were made all the more bitter for the vanquished by the terms dictated by the victors at the Treaty of Versailles in France, which required the belligerent nation to demilitarize, deindustrialize, and pay steep reparations. One of the industries particularly hard hit by the war and post-war agreements was shipping. During the 4-year war, Germany's shipbuilders saw orders for new ships and payments on existing work orders subordinated to the war effort. After the war, orders for new ships and shipping services remained virtually non-existent, despite the fact that Germany had lost many ships during the conflict. Those German ships that survived the war were seized by the Allies as war reparations and to replenish their own losses. The prospects for any German shipping company in 1918 were, at best, bleak. One of Germany's most successful shipping companies prior to the war was the Hamburg South America Steamship Company, popularly known as Hamburg Süd. Founded on November 4, 1871, the company served the growing market of Germans eager to travel to South America. In the pre-war years, the company provided regular monthly service to Argentina and Brazil. The company did more than simply sail to the southern hemisphere. In the decades that followed its establishment, Hamburg Süd emerged as a leader in the South American trade and transport business, with 3 ships sailing to South America. At the outbreak of the conflict in 1914, the company was operating more than 50 ships, constituting roughly 325,000 gross registered tons, GRT, and was a major force in international shipping. With the onset of the war to end all wars, however, everything changed. Hamburg Süd's fleet immediately came under attack in response to Germany's aggression in Europe. One of Hamburg Süd's finest ships, the Cap Trafalgar, was launched on March 1, 1914, and sailed on its maiden voyage just days later on March 10th. It was an impressive vessel. At more than 600 feet in length, the 18,710 GRT behemoth was capable of 17 knots, and was adorned with what was then state-of-the-art technology and amenities. But none of that mattered when hostilities commenced in July of that same year. In response to the declaration of war, the government of Kaiser Wilhelm II and Hamburg Süd armed ships such as the Cap Trafalgar. However, its armaments were light, consisting of only 2 small cannons and 6 machine guns. In an attempt to further ensure its safe passage, one of the ship's funnels was removed, and it was repainted to disguise it as a British liner. It did not work. In September 1914, while steaming a few hundred miles off the Brazilian coast, the ship was caught by the British ocean liner Carmania. Like so many other merchant and passenger ships, the Carmania had been converted for war and was being used to hunt German merchant ships and smaller vessels. Far from home and badly in need of resupply, the Cap Trafalgar was headed to the island of Trinidad. Portuguese for Trinity, the small archipelago of volcanic islands off the Brazilian coast was secretly being used by Germany as an emergency supply base. At roughly 9:30 in the morning of September 14th, the Carmania spotted its foe's smoke and began pursuing the Cap Trafalgar, ultimately trapping the German ship against the island's anchorage. The Carmania was much more heavily armed. As such, the commander of the Cap Trafalgar attempted to flee to deeper waters rather than fight. Orders were given for full speed ahead, and the German liner attempted to outrun the British vessel. It nearly worked. The Carmania gave chase and closed the distance. A 90-minute battle ensued, with both ships exchanging a non-stop barrage of cannon and machine gun fire. The Carmania was the first to fire, but the shots fell short of the target. The Cap Trafalgar returned fire, and its cannons proved accurate. The German ship landed devastating hits on the British liner, blowing apart sections of the deck. Even though it was outgunned, the Cap Trafalgar initially had the upper hand in the battle. Both ships continued firing and ultimately closed the distance to within a few dozen yards. The Carmania was absorbing blow after blow from roughly 70 direct cannon hits. Even though machine gun fire pinned down the crew, they managed to fire back and scored a direct hit on the Cap Trafalgar. The shot struck the German liner below the waterline, and the large ship began taking on water. When it was apparent the ship could not be saved, the captain lowered lifeboats and the crew abandoned ship. After listing to the port, the Cap Trafalgar sank bow first. It was the first armed passenger liner of the war to be sunk by another armed liner. The crew was lucky. The German ship Kronprinz Wilhelm was nearby and had picked up the Cap Trafalgar's distress call. After rescuing those sailors who made it into the lifeboats, the Wilhelm quickly steamed from the scene. Its commander chose not to linger, worried his ship would also be vulnerable to attack from the Carmania or other British warships that might be prowling the waters. He need not have worried. The Carmania, although still afloat, was badly damaged and in no condition for battle. It is estimated that a few dozen sailors were killed on the Cap Trafalgar, while the Carmania suffered 9 killed in the battle, The loss of the Kap Trafalgar was one of the first of many devastating setbacks of the war for both the German Navy and Hamburg Süd. Indeed, the company would lose its entire merchant and luxury fleets to military conscription or sinking. Its continuity as a leading shipping company was less the question than whether Hamburg Süd would even exist in the post-war years. With grim prospects for any recovery from the war, Hamburg Süd's directors met in 1920 to discuss the fate of the company. What emerged from the meeting was no less than audacious, if not completely unrealistic. Rather than discontinue operations or pursue a path of austerity to ensure the company's survival, the directors developed an ambitious plan to completely rebuild their line of ships. Given the weak German economy and limited market for new ship construction, Hamburg Süd soldiered on with just 3 small schooners. To supplement its meager fleet, the company creatively chartered ships from other companies in order to continue serving its customers, making it one of the few shipping lines to continue service in those difficult years. Hamburg Süd thus managed to keep afloat as a company and gain the confidence and loyalty of merchants eager to fill the post-war gap in trade. Aggressive and well-managed, Hamburg Süd was also one of the few large companies in all of Germany to prosper in the devastated post-war order. Despite competition from the Norddeutscher Lloyd Company, which operated in the North Atlantic, Hamburg Süd continued to prosper and drive Germany's post-war recovery. It even managed to launch a new steamer as early as 1920, the 5,745-ton Argentina, which crossed the ocean at 10 knots. By 1926, the company had done the unthinkable, surpassing its pre-war numbers and enjoying record profits. It was around this time that the company's directors promoted a bold plan to build one of the grandest vessels on the seas, one inspired by the most legendary ship in history, the Titanic. It would be the flagship of the Hamburg Süd line and the gem of German shipping. For the task of producing such a large and technologically sophisticated ship, Hamburg Süd selected the Hamburg-based shipbuilder Blohm und Voss. Not only were the Germans some of the best shipbuilders in all the world, but Blohm und Voss was one of the oldest and most respected builders in Germany. It was a wise decision. Founded on April 5, 1877 by Hermann Blohm and Ernst Voss, the company's main shipyard was on the island of Coeverde, near Hamburg. Known for its quality ship construction and attention to detail, the company's shipbuilders had even studied the Titanic's sinking in order to engineer safer ships. For instance, when they launched the massive 34,500-ton Fatherland on April 3, 1913, 1 year after the sinking of the Titanic, they outfitted the then pride of Germany with 84 lifeboats. The Titanic had only 20. Despite the devastation of World War I, by the 1920s the company's manufacturing site on Coeverde boasted 3 massive waterfront construction berths, 2 of them capable of working on ships more than 300 feet in length. Blohm und Voss was so successful that it employed a whopping 16,000 workers during the 1920s and, in later years, managed to build some of Germany's most legendary ships, such as the Bismarck and the dreaded U-boats that inflicted such a terrible toll on Allied shipping during World War II. The company also built the ocean liner RMS Majestic, which was, for a time, the largest ship in the world and owned by the White Star Line, the parent company of the Titanic, and the MV Wilhelm Gustloff, a ship that would end up holding the dubious distinction of being the world's worst maritime disaster, with roughly 9,000 lives lost to a Russian torpedo in the final days of World War II. The Third Reich's official yacht, the Grille, built in 1935 and used as Hitler's personal maritime conveyance, was another one of Blohm and Voss's ships, and the company provided ships for Germany's Strength Through Joy program. This Nazi initiative offered cruises for German workers as part of Hitler's propaganda efforts. In the 1930s, it even became the largest tourism operator in the world. Even though Blom and Voss survived both world wars, the same cannot be said of its image, which was tarnished by its association with the Nazis. In 1944 and 1945, the company had its own labor camp and used inmates from that camp to work at a shipyard in Hamburg-Steinwerder. The camp was a subcamp of the infamous concentration camp at Neuengamme, which later figures prominently in the story of the Cap Arcona and this book. The company managed to recover from complete destruction after both the wars and from its association with the Nazis. After the war, it continued building some of the world's largest ships, yachts, and airplanes, but perhaps none of its products has been as celebrated as the Cap Arcona. Chapter 2. The Queen of the Atlantic. The grand ship was christened on May 14, 1927. In a simpler time, the launch of an ocean liner was a public spectacle. Company executives, shipyard workers, prospective passengers, newspaper reporters, and curious onlookers alike came for a glimpse of a hulking ship and to daydream about the far-off exotic ports it would soon visit. A crowd had gathered to witness the event at the Blom and Voss shipyards. Excitement was in the air. Germany had had little to celebrate in the past several years. Before the Cap Arcona slid down a ramp into Hamburg harbor at the entrance to the river Elbe, a bottle of champagne wielded by Beatrix von Amsink christened the sturdy hull. From an elevated platform, von Amsink, daughter of the head of the Hamburg-Süd line, spoke of the ship quite poetically, saying, "Out of the waves of the Baltic in the north, of the lovely island of Rügen, there rise steep cliffs crowned by a lighthouse, which beams its light out over the sea every night. The name of these cliffs, the only cape which graces Germany's coast, Cape Arcona, will from now on be your name. May you sail the seas to the honor of our dear German fatherland, and to the joy of your company, and be a further bond between the New World and the Old." As the largest and most luxurious ship traveling to South America, the Cap Arcona earned the nickname the Queen of the South Atlantic. Others referred to her as the Pearl of the Atlantic, the Flower of the Atlantic, and even the Floating Palace. That it was. It was the latest and most advanced of the Cap line of passenger ships built by Blom and Voss for Hamburg-Süd, which included the Cap Villano, built in 1906, Cap Finisterre, built in 1911, Cap Trafalgar, built in 1913, and the Cap Polonio, built in 1914. On October 29, 1927, construction on the Cap Arcona, which had begun on July 21, 1926, was completed. 3 consecutive days of sea trials were conducted, beginning the day prior to the ship's completion. They proved successful. It was a truly remarkable ship. Ever since the christening of the ship, the final preparations were followed closely by German officials and ship enthusiasts worldwide. Indeed, anticipation mounted as Germany's answer to the Titanic prepared for its maiden voyage. On November 19th, that day finally arrived. On that bright, crisp autumn day, wealthy passengers and curious onlookers gathered on the docks of Hamburg to witness the newest ocean liner in the German fleet. With 3 massive smokestacks towering 50 feet above 9 shining decks, the Cap Arcona sat majestically in port, awaiting its first sailing. The fresh red paint of the funnels glistened in the morning sun, contrasting with the stark black and white exterior of the ship's slender hull, creating a memorable effect for those in attendance to witness the maiden voyage. The commotion on the docks included workers carrying casks of fresh caviar to the ship's kitchen and vintage bottles of wine for the extensive wine cellar. On board, teams of engineers in the bowels of the ship and stewards scurrying about the hallways prepared to take 1,325 affluent travelers to South America. The Cap Arcona's passengers were all treated to the finest accommodations afloat. Fully 575 of them traveled in first-class suites, 275 traveled in second-class cabins, while the remaining 475 were housed in dormitories. Those traveling among the latter group dined separately from their privileged peers and were not permitted at the musical performances. First-class travelers benefited from additional exclusive services, personal butlers, and some of the largest staterooms afloat. These spacious accommodations included sitting rooms, sofas, armchairs upholstered in silk, and restrooms with a full bath. Not surprisingly, the ship's passengers included the crème de la crème from Germany and Europe, as well as moneyed families from Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro. The dashing American actor Clark Gable sailed in one of the ship's first-class suites, and noted Hamburg poet Hans Leip, who wrote Lily Marlene during World War I, honeymooned on the liner. Leip even dedicated the poem Honeymoon in the Sea to the ship while on board the liner. One wealthy patron from Argentina booked 2 first-class suites for her 14 dogs, while a prominent family from Brazil paid to have cows and chickens stowed in the ship's hold, so that their children would be assured fresh milk and eggs every morning. The ship's logs from South American cruises in the 1930s indicate that most of the affluent passengers came from Germany, England, Brazil, and Argentina. But the Cap Arcona attracted guests from numerous other countries as well. The passenger manifests, which listed passengers by the class cabin in which they were traveling, also show that several female guests traveled alone, and that passengers both boarded and exited the cruise from several ports of call, such as Vigo, Lisbon, Madeira, and Montevideo, not just Buenos Aires and Hamburg. Elegant multi-page programs and itineraries were given to guests, featuring photographs of the ports of call, distances to each port, fares, disembarkation information, listings of the ship's agents in each port, the names of all the ship's officers, menus, and lists of the passengers traveling on the voyage by class and section of the ship. Sailing from its home port of Hamburg, the impressive new liner presented a new standard of luxury and engineering for the shipping world. A marvel of technological progress, the Cap Arcona was not only the largest ship transporting passengers to South America, but also one of the world's fastest liners. The shipbuilders had managed to fit it with the most advanced propulsion system of the time. 2 steam turbines generated an astonishing 24,000 horsepower, allowing the twin propellers to push the massive luxury liner across the Atlantic Ocean at 20 knots, a speed nearly unequaled at the time. It raced from Hamburg to Buenos Aires in a mere 15 days. The 4th largest ship in the German merchant fleet, the Cap Arcona measured roughly 676 feet in length and 189 feet from its keel to the topside flags. Its specs included a beam of nearly 85 feet with a draft of 50 feet. It displaced 27,561 tons and was crewed by 475 hand-picked sailors, chefs, concierges, and other service professionals. As a result, the luxury liner ended up costing a staggering 35 billion Reichsmarks. In short, it was a ship worthy of the adulation. Hamburg Sud selected the best officers for the new flagship. The Cap Arcona was commanded by Commodore Ernst Rollen, an experienced captain who had previously served as master of the Cap Polonio. His chief officer was Richard Nejar, who was being groomed for higher command. In addition to the experienced crew, masseurs, physicians, and chaplains were on hand to further serve the guests. The Cap Arcona even had its own postmark and a seaplane that brought regular mail service to the ship regardless of its location on the planet. First-class passengers were told that their every request would be fulfilled no matter how fantastic. The ship's top 3 decks boasted an assortment of recreational amenities, including regulation-sized tennis and shuffleboard courts, an indoor heated pool, chaises longues, spacious decks bookended by large potted palms, and a walking track stretching 1/5 of a mile along the promenade deck. Passengers enjoyed everything from leisurely games and gambling to an expansive collection of art that adorned the ship's elegantly decorated corridors and lobbies.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?